You know, I'm watching Joe Biden, I'm listening to Joe Biden, or not. The speech he gave the other night about the horrendous Jew hatred and anti-Semitism swirling the country and anti-Americanism was contemptible, absolutely contemptible. And then I got to thinking, you know, I'm not the youngest guy on Fox. And I grew up in the Reagan era, and I worked in the Reagan administration. I worked on the confirmation of Robert Bork. I saw what he did as chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. I saw what he was saying about the Israelis, about Ronald Reagan and other people. This is a diabolical, evil, nasty man, and I want to give you a taste of it. NBC News, a couple of years back, Joe Biden didn't just compromise with segregationists. He fought for their cause in schools, experts say. This is NBC, which, of course, loves Biden. In a 1975 Senate hearing, the legendary civil rights lawyer Jack Greenberg had something to say to freshman Senator Joe Biden. Greenberg, longtime director of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, took Biden to task for sponsoring a bill that would limit the power of courts to order school desegregation with busing. It was a move that followed the wishes of many of Biden's white constituents in Delaware. The bill, he said, heaves a brick through the window of school integration, said Greenberg, one of the lawyers who won the Brown versus Board of Education case that ended legal school segregation 21 years earlier. And according to Greenberg, Biden was the man with his hand on the brick. Political experts and education policy researchers say Biden, a supporter of civil rights in other arenas, did not simply compromise with segregationists. He also led the charge on an issue that kept black students away from classrooms of white students. His legislative work against school integration advanced a more palatable version of the separate but equal doctrine and undermined the nation's short-lived effort at educational equality, legislative and education history experts say. Joe Biden. Racism and segregation, if it was good for Joe Biden, if it could get him votes, he would support it. Here we have the Gazette. We must never forget. Joe Biden wants Americans to remember their country's racist legacy. They say, well, we should take his advice. Their advice is as follows. There were 37 members, said Biden, of the House of Representatives who were open members of the Klan. There were 5, if I'm not mistaken, it could have been 7, I think it was 5 members of the United States Senate, open members of the Klan. Millions of white Americans belonged to the Klan, and they weren't even embarrassed by it. They were proud of it, said Biden in a speech. Right, and Biden seemed proud of them. He sided with notorious segregationists to oppose integrated busing, saying in 1977 he didn't want his white children to grow up in a jungle, the jungle being a racial jungle, quote unquote. Biden called Senator Robert Byrd a friend. At Byrd's funeral, Biden called him a mentor, and he was a guide. Even more, Byrd elevated the Senate, he said. This is a man who knew exactly what he was doing, Biden said while eulogizing Byrd. Biden has praised or boasted about friendship with at least 6 segregationists. That would include Byrd, Talmadge of Georgia, Eastland, and Stennis of Mississippi. That's 4, and there were 2 others. Lecturing the American people, talking about us as if we were the white supremacists and racists, when he was. And he did it for votes. And he did it for politics. Here's a piece from our friend Mark Levin in the Washington Post a couple years back. President Biden wants credit for nominating the first black woman to the Supreme Court, but here's the shameful irony. As a senator, Biden warned President George W. Bush that if he nominated the first black woman to serve on the Supreme Court, he would filibuster and kill her nomination. The story begins in 2003 when Bush nominated Judge Janice Rogers Brown to serve on the U.S. Court of Appeals for D.C., considered the country's second most important court and has produced more Supreme Court justices than any other federal court. Brown was immediately hailed as a potential Supreme Court nominee. Well, Biden did what he does best, character assassination. He tried to destroy her. He filibustered her, he blocked her, because he didn't want George Bush getting credit for potentially the first black woman nominee to the U.S. Supreme Court. Although Biden called the filibuster the relic of Jim Crow, he threatened to use that against the black woman who actually lived under Jim Crow. That's Brown. Now, who was this woman? She was the daughter and granddaughter of sharecroppers, grew up in rural Alabama during the dark days of segregation, when her family refused to enter restaurants or theaters with separate entrances for black customers. She rose from poverty and put herself through college and UCLA Law School as a working single mother. She was a self-made African-American legal star, but she was an outspoken conservative. So Biden set out to destroy her. Clarence Thomas, created equal, Clarence Thomas, in his own words, He lashes out at the Democrats and Biden, who chaired the Senate Judiciary Committee and oversaw his confirmation process. Among other things, he says, do I have, like, stupid written on my back of my shirt? I mean, come on. We know what this is all about. That is the effort to destroy him. People should just tell the truth. This is the wrong black guy. He has to be destroyed. Just say it. Then now we're at least honest with each other. The idea was to get rid of me. And then after I was there, it was to undermine me. While Thomas doesn't mention Biden by name, he's asked by filmmakers to respond directly to Biden's line of questioning during the hearings on his views of natural law. I have no idea what he was talking about. I understood what he was trying to do. I didn't really appreciate it. Natural law was nothing more than a way of tricking me into talking about abortion. This Biden is a sleaze. He has been a cancer on the body politic from the day he walked into the U.S. Senate. Look what he did to Robert Bork, one of the most renowned, brilliant legal scholars in the history of this country. John Paul Stevens, who was a very liberal appointee to the Supreme Court by Gerald Ford. The longest-serving liberal justice in modern times has lamented the treatment of a conservative judge prevented from joining him on the Supreme Court by Joe Biden. The failed Supreme Court nomination of Robert Bork changed public perceptions of would-be jurists, seen now more for their political views than legal experience and qualifications, says retired Justice John Paul Stevens. I've always ranked him, meaning Bork, as the most persuasive Solicitor General who represented the United States before the Supreme Court while I was a justice. I thought and still think he was eminently qualified for the position. Of course, President Reagan nominated him. Then Senator Joe Biden, he was the chairman of the committee, presided over Bork confirmation hearings and is viewed as having helped lay the groundwork for hyper-political nomination battles that persist today. Joe Biden destroyed the confirmation system in the Senate. He unleashed the filibuster against judges and judicial nominees, really in a major way in the first time in American history. Before Bork was nominated to the High Court, Biden said he would support his nomination if tapped for the Supreme Court. But Biden reversed his position as Senate Democrats and liberal groups opposed Bork and launched a campaign to derail his nomination, to smear him, to character assassinate him. The confirmation battle set up stage for ideological wars over Supreme Court nominees ever since that center on judicial philosophy rather than on qualifications and give rise to the verb to Bork, defined by Merriam-Webster dictionaries to attack or defeat unfairly through an organized campaign of harsh public criticism or vilification. The tactics of Bork's opponents included misstatements about his views, this is Justice Stevens speaking, and a certain amount of unfair comment on his character, motivated in part by a fear that his approval might lead to the re-examination and possible overturning of Roe v. Wade, Stevens wrote. What about Reagan? What did Reagan think of Joe Biden? Reagan was a very kind man. Well, the Reagan administration has adopted a foreign policy of unwise intervention and rigid ideology, which has failed in the Soviet Union, Nicaragua, and South Africa. Democratic presidential contender Joseph Biden said yesterday at the Kennedy School of Government, this is 1987, Biden, who will officially announce his candidacy, said that Reagan had lost the confidence of both the American people and the Western European nations by sponsoring, quote, military adventures, unquote, around the world, and by avoiding normal foreign policy channels. He said, military interventionism, as embodied in the Reagan doctrine, is in tatters. It has led to the deceiving of our allies, trading arms to terrorists, circumventing Congress, and most profoundly, losing the confidence of the American people and our European allies. One of the greatest presidents in American history who destroyed the Soviet Union, who pushed communism out of our hemisphere. This is Joe Biden, who is a disaster in so many respects, foreign policy at the top. Biden said that American foreign policy has failed to adapt to changing realities and has instead been characterized by outdated approaches to the Soviet Union and world problems, particularly in Central America and South Africa. That's Biden attacking Reagan. What did Reagan think? President Joe Biden is absolutely right, writes in the Washington Examiner, Quinn Hillier, to make a case now on behalf of arming Ukraine, but the way he chose to do it was hypocritical as can be. Biden used as a model of behavior the late President Ronald Reagan's famous speech where in the Gipper in Berlin said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. One problem, Biden at the time hated that speech, you heard it. He said it was dangerous rhetoric. In Reagan's personal diaries, the Gipper rarely mentions Biden. But after his Berlin Wall speech, Reagan was infuriated by Biden, who at the time was in a race for president that would fizzle to nothingness when Biden repeatedly lied about his heritage and his resume. Biden had blasted Reagan's speech and the Reagan doctrine of arming people willing to fight for their own freedom against autocratic regimes. In his diaries, Reagan wrote, "There was some talk about Senator Biden, now candidate for president. I saw him on CNN last night speaking to the JFK School of Harvard University. He's smooth but pure demagogue, out to save America from the Reagan doctrine." Reagan was right. Biden is a pure demagogue and always has been. Robert Gates served under every president since Nixon, save Bill Clinton. What did Gates say? And I paraphrase, "Biden has been wrong about foreign policy and national security in every major respect for 40 years. That's close enough. We all know it to be true. What about Biden's treatment of the state of Israel? Oh, he loves Israel. Oh, my gosh. Decades of it. Great piece by Barry Shaw in Israel Hayom. Joe Biden is once again at loggerheads with Israel, he wrote just a few weeks ago. This has been brewing for decades. Biden infamously admitted telling Benjamin Netanyahu, "Bibi, I love you, but I don't agree with a damn thing you say." Biden seems to have learned nothing from his personal contentious relationship with Israel going back decades. Biden's animus towards Israel has not been confined to Netanyahu. Biden's long and contentious relationship with Israel goes back to June 1982 when, as senator, he threatened another Israeli prime minister, we've talked about this, Menachem Begin, with holding back U.S. aid to Israel, which caused Begin to respond. In other words, just like he's blackmailing Netanyahu, just like he's behind the ICC effort to issue an arrest warrant against the prime minister of Israel. This is his modus operandi. You can see throughout his life. On the Senate floor with the racists, you can see what he's done to the Senate Judiciary Committee, how he attacked Reagan and Bork and Thomas, and not just attacked them, character assassinated them. And my Begin said, "Don't threaten us with cutting off your aid. It won't work. I'm not a Jew with trembling knees. I am a proud Jew with 3,700 years of civilized history. Nobody came to our aid when we were dying in the gas chambers and ovens. Nobody came to our aid when we were striving to create our country. We paid for it. We fought for it. We died for it. We'll stand by our principles. We will defend them, and when necessary, we will die for them again, with or without your aid," he says to Biden, eyeball to eyeball. 1982, Senator Biden reportedly banged on the table with his fist, to which Begin retorted, "This desk is designed for writing, not for fists. Don't threaten us with slashing aid. Do you think that because the U.S. lends us money, it is entitled to impose on us what they think we must do? We're grateful for the assistance we have received, but we are not to be threatened. I am a proud Jew. 3,000 years of culture behind me, and you will not frighten me with threats. Take note, we do not want a single soldier of yours to die for us." Seems Biden failed to learn from that experience. As a fledgling senator, Biden made his first visit to Israel in 1972, just days before the Arab attack against Israel in the Yom Kippur War. Biden visited a wary Golda Meir, then the prime minister, having come from Egypt, and according to one official who was present at the meeting, Biden told a tensed Israeli prime minister, "Don't worry, Egypt was not preparing for war against the Jewish state because, as he put it, they accepted Israel's military superiority." Biden was wrong. Again, 40 days later, Egypt, Syria, and Jordan launched their war against the Jewish state on Judaism's holiest day. Biden had been deceived by the Arabs and brought a deceptive message to Israel. Some people are saying he's doing the same thing today. As vice president in the final days of the Obama presidency, Biden played a key role in delivering the anti-Israel votes in the UN Security Council, Resolution 2334, December 23, 2016, which in its deceptive language cast Israel's illegally occupying land in 1967 that had been illegally occupied by Jordan since the Arab War of 1948 on territory that had been granted to Israel by virtue of a majority vote for the UN Partition Plan resolution. This was Obama's stab in Israel's back as they were preparing to leave the White House after their defeat at the hands of Donald Trump. Obama has been upset by Prime Minister Netanyahu's vocal challenge to the Obama-Biden disastrous appeasement policy toward a nuclear-ambitious Iran. Biden's role in this duplicitous diplomatic move was delivering the votes for Obama, who deliberately failed to apply the U.S. veto to a damagingly anti-Israel bill they effectively supported. The name-calling, the character assassination. New York Post, a month and a half ago, Biden called Netanyahu a bad effing guy. He's undermining Netanyahu with the international community, publicly and privately. He's undermining Netanyahu's government. He's now backing the ICC, this corrupt left-wing European court that is planning to issue an arrest warrant against Netanyahu. All he has to do is say no, Biden, but he won't. Why? Because he's behind it. But Biden does praise certain people. This is from the Daily Beast. Biden praises fighter Rashida Tlaib, promises to keep her family safe. This is a Marxist, Islamist, America-hating Jew hater. And Biden praises her while he's trashing Netanyahu. I admire your intellect. I admire your passion. I admire your concern for so many other people, Biden said at the Dearborn Ford plant. And it's from my heart. I pray that your grandmom and family are well. I promise I'm going to do everything to see that they are in the West Bank. You're a fighter, and God, thank you for being a fighter. Just as he kissed AOC's lower half the other day as well. So this is who Joe Biden is. And now his focus is on Donald Trump. How do I destroy Donald Trump? And in Politico, they leak, Biden blasts Trump as a despicable danger to democracy. So you see the man who has fought integration, who has supported racism and segregation, the most anti-Semitic president in American history, who's undermining the state of Israel, who's attacking the Prime Minister of Israel day in and day out, and wants an arrest warrant issued against him by the notorious ICC, a man who will not let Israel defeat Hamas while he is funding Iran and the terrorists that surround Israel, the man who sits silently for weeks on end while the Jew hatred is spreading through the colleges and universities that he's relying on for votes, for Dearborn, Michigan, that he's relying on for votes, that is, Democrat Party voters. He comes out with a lame, pathetic statement, no profile in courage, certainly won't go down as one of the great speeches in American history, could barely get it out, 3.5 minutes, who's done nothing, hasn't lifted a finger to fight anti-Semitism in this country, just as he never lifted a finger to fight racism and segregation when he went into the Senate, quite the opposite. Now you see, if you don't vote for him, Donald Trump threatens democracy. Donald Trump is Hitler. Donald Trump is a dictator. Donald Trump will imprison his opponents, which of course is exactly what Biden and the Democrats are doing. Donald Trump needs to be painted, well, as he painted Reagan, as he painted Bork, as he paints Netanyahu, as he painted Menachem Begin, as he painted Clarence Thomas. That's who Joe Biden is. He's a thug.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.